Hello and welcome to another Pursue Network interview. I am incredibly blessed today to be joined by John Kyle, who is someone who works at Davis Tent, leads worship in his own locality, and is based in the southeast of England. So all those people from Pursue Network who are from the southwest, we're going to connect with the rest of the country right now as we chat with John. John, it is a pleasure to have you here today. It is so good to see you again. Tell us about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, Steve, it's really good to be with you today. Thank you so much for having me, and really good to be a tiny part of Pursue Network and what you guys are up to. As you say, at the minute, I'm part of David's Tent, the team that helps put on David's Tent. I've been part of the team since 2016, so it's been a few years. And in a nutshell, what I do as part of the Davis Tent team is primarily I help coordinate all of the team of volunteers that help kind of make the event work. We have this incredible community of about 600 volunteers who come and do all the little jobs and serve in all those often unseen places. So I work with that group, and then I also part of putting together our events throughout the year, so things like worship nights and retreats, and then I also do some work with our musicians and worship leaders throughout the year, and at the event in the summer as well.
Fantastic, exciting. Yeah. It's a huge role. I love that.
Yeah, well, it's the nature of sort of small organisation is everyone does a bit of everything, but it's great. It's a real pleasure and privilege to be involved in so much, you know.
What's it like coordinating 600 different volunteers each year?
Well, great question. It is a huge administrative job, and shout out to the amazing people that I work alongside, because they carry a lot of that administrative weight, not being a particularly sort of super administrator myself. But it is, such a pleasure, because you get to kind of journey with so many people, and you get to empower and release so many people into sort of serving, and you get to see people express their worship in so many different ways throughout the year, and in particular at the event. So logistically, it's a big one, but also it's great fun. It's great fun.
I love that. You mentioned that you're not a strong admin person, but you've got people that help you out with that.
Yeah.
I love the fact that you're partnering with people so that you sort of know your strengths and weaknesses. And is that a sort of model you've used in the past for building a successful team?
Yeah, I think it's gradually it's something I'm continuing to learn more and more, you know. And I think before I did Davis Tent, before I worked for Davis Tent, I worked in the hospitality industry, and I used to set up and run coffee shops. And so actually sort of going through that process and learning dynamics of things like hospitality and things like working as a team, you very quickly realize that that picture of being a body and being many parts of a body is actually it's such a good way to kind of a good way to describe what it's like working with other people, and the recognition of here's something that I am passionate about and that I'm good at. Someone else sees the world in a totally different way, and actually that's of real benefit. And so the way that we sort of will try and do it with our team where possible is by empowering each other, and be very as community and democratic focused as possible, and kind of call on and champion one another in all the work that we do. And for me, it just so happens that I get to work with some people who are amazing administrators, and so that really blesses me that I don't have to carry that weight, and I get to do other things that are more suitable to my slightly less administrative personality.
Yeah, I think it's always good when you've got a team of people that you can rely on. So you're not saying, I am the only person that can do everything, but you're saying, actually, I know my strengths, I know my weaknesses. I want to empower those around me to shine in the same way that I can shine in what I do. So,
yeah. And, I think I think the sort of the foundation of that perhaps is the idea of worship as service. You know, I think if we're thinking, as we're thinking about our team, and you know, not just the team at Davis Tent, but more generally thinking about how, you know, being part of a church community, for example, I'm convinced that service, you know, a posture of service is the key. You know, it's you look at any of the teachings of Jesus about how to engage with one another, and it's always about serving. You know, it's always about preferring one another. It's always about putting one another first. And gosh, that's a challenge, but I think that's the secret sauce of the kingdom, is how do we love and serve one another. And you know, even more so, I think whenever we start talking about leadership and things like that, I think that service is the real key. You know, that needs to be how we view anything to do with leading, I think.
Oh yeah, I still remember as a teacher many years ago, my first opportunity to be the year leader came up, and I remember thinking, at last I get to do things my way now, and it wasn't that at all. I got to make other people shine brighter.
Yeah,
that was the
perfect.
point. The whole point was to serve the team and make sure that they were enabled to teach effectively, not just to do things my way. And I will say there was a few moments of frustration of I finally got here and I can't do what I want. But yeah, I totally get that. It's about service, isn't it? It's about serving the people around you to make them shine. Yeah. I love that. And I think that's a really important thing in serving in worship teams, that when you're listening to different instruments and trying to work out what each person's bringing to it, to make sure that if you hear someone doing, like an electric guitarist doing something really good, you don't then say, no, don't do that, because I want a different feel here, but actually to try and lean into some of those moments and go, okay, well, can the whole band slide towards that, or can the whole band adapt in the moment to something that God might be releasing?
Yeah, 100%. I think it. Well, I haven't found a sort of space where the principles of serving one another don't lead to the most fruitful outcome. You know, like whether it's like actually playing in a band together. You know, you have that is it Debussy who says that music is what happens in between the notes. You know, and if you're a musician and you're thinking about that only place that leads you is this kind of like, how do I serve, you know, in what I do, how do I serve what happens elsewhere around me? So if it's like in a band, it's the way to do it. If it's like in your team, you know, because so much of being in a worship team is about what happens, not whenever you're serving on stage, as it were, you know. And in those moments, it has to be about how do we love and serve one another as well, you know. It's the way to do it, I think.
Totally agree. So obviously you're used to leading worship potentially in quite relaxed atmospheres in which it's not just a song and stop, but it's extended worship. How do you manage the spontaneous moments? How do you plan for the spontaneous moments as a team so that you are united and able to go forward in some sort of way, but also with the flexibility of following the Holy Spirit?
Oh, good question.
Big question, that one.
Big question. Perhaps there's sort of, maybe there's like sort of three dynamics to it. Let's see if I can remember all three. I think the first one is, you know, over the years there's always been this conversation about what's the word, like perfectionism. That's not quite the right word, but you know what I mean, this idea of like, how do we become excellence, perhaps that's a better word. And you know, it sort of ebbs and flows, doesn't it, between we need to be really excellent versus we need to let go and allow the Spirit to do what the Spirit wants to do. And you know, the reality which we will probably all arrive at is that it's some combination of both, isn't it? I was reading recently in Exodus. Towards the end of Exodus, there's like chapter after chapter of the the instructions for creating the tabernacle, right? And so it's listing all of these like materials. It's, dripping with gold. There's purple cloth everywhere. There's all these measurements. And the thing that sort of struck me reading that was, gosh, they're so prepared. Like the planning that is going into this and the attention to detail that is going into this is actually kind of astonishing. And they're creating the space for encounter with God. And I was sort of quite impacted by this idea of actually planning to be in God's presence is an appropriate thing to do. So I think if we're talking about playing in a band or engaging in a time of worship, actually planning is a positive thing. Attention to detail is a positive thing. Being good at your instrument, being fluent in your instrument is a positive thing. So I think that's part of it, is that actually being good at what you do practically is not a bad thing. In fact, it's a good thing. Yeah. But then I think the second, here's where I have to try and figure out if I can remember the three bits. The second part of it, I think, is a community dynamic, and actually, again, on a kind of practical level, having opportunity to get to know each other, having opportunity to serve one another on and off stage. Often the dynamics of say perhaps a kind of spontaneous moment, or a moment where there's more space than just playing verse chorus, tends to be about how do we honor one another in this moment. If you're a musician, how do you recognize what's happening around? How do you honor what's happening within your community? How do you honor what's happening in the room? I think there's the service dynamic, and then I think the sort of foundation that service is born out of, I would say, is humility. There's an old Scottish theologian called Andrew Murray, who has a book called Humility, which I would highly recommend everyone to read. The most amazing book. But the way he describes it is, humility is the soil out of which all other virtues grow, or all other graces is the way that he describes it. And I think that is a principle for life, but I think it is also a practical, like, humility is the soil out of which it grows in moments of worship, because our goal as worshippers in that moment is to approach God with right understanding of who we are. And so on a practical level, it's like, maybe this isn't the moment for a drum solo, or maybe this isn't the moment for like a raging guitar solo, or even maybe this isn't the moment for me to sing out. Maybe this is the moment for me to, point towards God or whatever. So I think there's that kind of community dynamic to it, which has practical outworkings. Are we fluent together? Are we able to go in a direction together? And I think that happens more as you get deeper together as a community. And probably doing things like feedback is helpful, doing things like how did it go, whatever. And then I think the third aspect, and this probably sort of brings humility from the second into the third again, is being okay to wait on the Lord. I think one of the I'm aware that the opportunity that we have at something like David's Tent is kind of unique, in the sense of very rarely do we have that length of time. Very rarely do we have the time and the space to do things like let's spend half an hour on one refrain and see what the Lord wants to do in this moment. So I'm aware that that's an outlier probably in terms of our experience. But I think it's not the form. the important thing actually is not the 72 hours, for example. 72 hours is 72 hours. If David's tent was 75 hours or 55 hours, it would have the same heart and we'd have the same intention. It's less to do with the form, and it's more to do with there's an Irish author called John O'Donoghue who talks about the reverence of approach. And let me just let me give you one line of what he says, if I may.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, that's okay. He says, often we approach things with greed and urgency, and we do not like to wait. And I think that, if we're thinking about these specific moments of like how do we engage with God in worship, if that's quite a specific kind of, we're looking at this moment in time, of like we have this period of 25 minutes or whatever it is, and there's certain things that we want to do and there's certain places that we want to go, and that's cool. I think we want to sort of, I'm always keen to like step back, or go deeper perhaps and ask like what are the deeper questions, like what are the real things that we're grappling with or engaging with in a moment like this. And I think he kind of like hits the nail on the head. There's that question of like, am I urgent and impatient in this moment? Am I greedy? Am I thinking about myself? Or actually is there the opportunity for me to be patient and to wait? I think and so I guess sort of just to sort of land that point, I think the hope would be is that we as worshippers will constantly move towards attending to God as opposed to attending to ourselves. And there's a journey in there, and you have all sorts of layers to that journey, like things like traditions and expressions and experiences. And so if to go from whenever I was a student, I went to a church for a period of time that would do one song and then sit down. Someone would say something, you stand up and do one song and then you sit down again. To go from that to David's tent is, your head will explode, and that's okay. And so but again, I then will return to humility and be like, actually, humility is the thing that will allow us to go on this journey from one song up and down through to actually creating space to wait on God, So yeah, that was hopefully those 3 points we can bullet point those. But I think
I don't know if you realise you've done this, but that was excellence, community, and God, which is ECG. So what you have found is the heartbeat of the answer to that question.
Maybe we should write a book together. That's perfect.
Absolutely, let's do it. I love it. I think there's this big thing of each event is for its purpose. And I know the first year, I went to Spring Harvest for 20 odd years. I think 25 years in a row I managed to go to Spring Harvest.
Yeah.
And there was a certain point I thought I need to start visiting other places as well. And I remember the youth group I was working with going, do you want to come to Soul Survivor with us? I thought, yes, let's do it. So I went to Soul Survivor and walked in and said, oh look, no chairs. And I was used to sort of comfortable environment of Spring Harvest, which is designed for families, and walked into Soul Survivor and no chairs anywhere. And then a few weeks later went to David's tent for the first time and thought, oh look, no floor.
Yeah.
And it was just the rawness of it and the extreme difference between the two was so amazing. Again, it was a long journey to get to that point where that sort of worship for me was, yes, this is now. It's digging deeper is the normal. And I think recognising where you are and what situation you're in is really important. Not trying to aspire to suddenly have this extended time of worship when people in your congregation might not be ready for it yet. But actually thinking about how you can start to build in some of those moments of humility, of community, of bouncing off each other in some way, and doing that from a place of excellence. So I love that.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I think I've used this analogy in a video before, but I'll use it again now because I think it's worth it. The way I always imagine preparation for a team is a bit like building a diving board. You want to build a really solid diving board so that you can go really high on it, stand out on the edge and feel confident. That's your preparation. And if that diving board is solid, then when you jump off, you can do amazing things. You're more likely to want to jump off into the deep and do something special. But if that diving board is dodgy, then you're not going to want to jump. So yeah, preparation is key in that one as well.
Yeah. I think, I think it is. You know, as I say, I've sort of experienced a lot of different expressions over the course of my life, been to a bunch of different churches and things like that. And you know, as I say, it's sort of we've always ebbed and flowed from the sort of the level of excellence. Let's play exactly the notes that are on the record, through to you know, going into worship times with no song list, and that kind of like, let's just see what the Lord does. And I think I think that there is a level of validity in all of them. And actually, you know, going back to our the picture of the body, different parts of the body, you know, have different uses or different expressions, and actually that's okay. And I think that the more open and, you know, if I'm aware that I'm ragging on this a lot, but the more humble we are, then the more we recognize the connection and, more importantly, the holiness and the beauty of God in each of these moments. And it is for a growing and loving community is able to kind of work through you're able to work and grow through your kind of experiential dynamics. The reality is that, you know, if we're looking at you know, those around us who do things, and perhaps kind of a lot of the guys in your network will spend time kind of looking at peers, or perhaps those people that are kind of more recognizable, and you kind of think, gosh, they're great at their craft, and actually that's something that I want to work towards. And I think that's not a bad thing, you know. I think that's fine, but I also think there has to be a recognition of the reality of God in each of our contexts. And I think if we approach him with humility, and with reverence, and with a right approach, with patience, as John O'Donoghue says, I think there's an encounter with God whatever it looks like, you know, whatever the situation is.
I think one of the songs I love to lead worship with at the moment is a song called Strength Full of Eyes. And you'll probably know it as Strength Full of Eyes, I won't sing too much of that in case the copyright thing gets flagged up. But the way that I tend to do it, and the way that I've sort of been singing it recently, is as a lament. We slow it right down and we just sing Strength Full of Eyes as we wait, as we wait, as we wait, and we slow it down and we put some minor chords around it and just change the atmosphere of it, because waiting on God, waiting on the one who created us, I think there was a moment of recognition that we're not doing this at our pace. We're doing this at the pace that God called us to. And that sense of humility in there is really, really key in that. Again, I'm aware of many worship leaders in the Southwest who have had conversations with me about people who are very eager in their teams to push forward and to get things moving. How would you speak to wisdom to a team who was determined to liven up the worship in their church, but perhaps as a congregation which isn't quite there yet? Have you got any tips and advice to sort of how to engage a congregation perhaps that isn't quite ready for the sort of worship that certain teams are aspiring towards, but want to get there eventually?
Oh, good question. Good question. I guess I'm aware that to a certain extent every context will be slightly different, won't it? And will have its own sort of idiosyncrasies or particularities, and it might be, in some places it will be things like a lack of musicians. In other places it will be like, well, we've done it this way for, you know, 300 years, and we're not in a rush to change it. I think, I guess, perhaps to go back to your amazing ECG, the ECG. I think there's a number of sort of tools within that potentially that can help. In that, I think the journey towards being proficient and being good at what you do is helpful. I sort of think, I don't know if you ever saw that amazing sort of video / meme going around a number of years ago of the worship team that are playing Oceans, and then they had the sort of like heavy metal drummer on his electric drum kit who was just like popping off. And I think to use that as an extreme example, it's like that's he's not reading the room, like we don't need to go from one to heavy metal. And so I think that perhaps leads into the second, which is I think there is, as I say, what happens on the stage or what happens in the music that you're playing during your worship time is only a small part of our job as Levites, and actually, we're called to serve one another, and that means, potentially there's opportunity for conversations and discussions that happen elsewhere with your church leader or with the other people in the church of like, what do we see as a worship expression? Like what can we do as a worship expression? What are some of the examples that we see either in the communities around us? What do we see in the Bible in terms of how we do these things? And going on that journey of like, maybe it's okay for us to explore some different expressions. And so what might that look like? It might be if the sort of change on a Sunday is slow going, maybe there's an opportunity for a prayer meeting or a worship meeting or a worship night. If there's a bunch of you that wants to express worship in a different way than it sort of happens on a Sunday morning, is there an opportunity for you to gather just yourselves? And I think I think that sort of in short, the goal. So Eugene Peterson has this amazing definition of worship. I don't know if you've heard or excuse me, read this, but he says worship is the strategy by which we what is it he says? It's the strategy we have by which we set aside our preoccupation with ourselves to attend to the presence of God. Worship is the strategy that we have to set aside the preoccupation with ourselves to attend to the presence of God. I just think it's the most astonishing and
Beautiful.
Deep kind of explanation of worship. But I think that, that is both full of opportunity and challenge. So it's on the challenge end of things, it's like, where in worship am I preoccupied with myself or with my own expression or with what I want to do? But then the other side, and the really like lifting the lid off our experience side of things, is what does attending to the presence of God mean? Does that only happen in church on a Sunday morning? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Does it even only happen whenever we're singing and with music? Again, no. Attending to the presence of God is this, arguably is a moment by moment, challenge for us. And so I think the reason I kind of say that is perhaps there is opportunity. Let's think about attending to the presence of God in a more broad way than just in the 25 minutes that we're given on a Sunday. It might look like, as I say, gathering in someone's living room to sing songs, and that time being like, do you know what? We're only going to sing songs about the holiness and the worthiness of God, and we're just going to be in this time together. We have one small goal, and we may sing one song the whole time or whatever it is. Some people might bring their instruments, maybe not, and actually that's the beginning of a journey there. I think on the sort of more perhaps practical end of things, I think leaning into conversation and community with your church is the key. There's that saying of like, it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. Whilst there's a kind of fun, catchy thing, it's probably not the best like community building thing. That's not really service, that's not really serving. And so maybe just blasting off and thinking what's the worst that could happen is perhaps not the best way to do it. But, have that conversation with your church leader and be like, hey, we have an opportunity, we have an opportunity to attend to the presence of God here. How can we explore doing that more? Is there a Sunday when you could talk first and lead into an opportunity for worship post talk, for example? That's a big one. That's a hard sell in my experience. But maybe those other kinds of things to explore perhaps.
And yet in that moment, I think there's value in that sometimes. Often we worship, we center ourselves on God, and then we hear a sermon, and then we sing one song, and it almost finishes the service, and we leave it. Well, this is the last song. We'll give glory to God in this moment, and then we'll just close it all. Actually digging deeper afterwards, perhaps having less time at the start to worship, but encountering the presence of God with the knowledge of who He is from that sermon could be a powerful moment. So yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I'm also where you described at one point about people gathering outside of a Sunday. And I'm aware of one community, I won't say where it is, but I'm aware of one community in Cornwall. I think that's a big enough geographical area for me to get away with that one. Who are gathering from different churches, people who are like-minded and like-hearted in worship.
Yeah.
So they're not causing disunity in their church,
Yeah.
but they're still finding a way to express the way that God has made them in worship. I think that's a powerful thing of finding a way to be not unified in conformity, but unity in diversity.
Yeah.
Which is certainly the picture we see in Revelation. When every tribe and tongue gathered, the fact that you can see the tribes and you can see the tongues, they're not singing the same language, they're not dressed the same way. It's every tribe and every tongue declaring glory to God in their own way, but yet in unity. I love it.
Yeah, that's it. And I think for people like you and I who have the opportunity to be a part of different communities in various different ways, I think there is a need for us probably to continually grapple with the idea that what we do is the way to do it, and I think that's a constant like practical conversation that we should have with one another and have with the people in our communities, and to constantly be asking God, like, where, going back to Eugene Peterson's thing, where are the points where we are preoccupied with ourselves, with our own expression, with our worship has to be an hour long. It has to be, you have to only do 5 songs in that hour. There has to be space for this. That's holding to that paradigm is as problematic as the sort of like, we're going to do a hymn and then we're going to sit down, and having to hold to that paradigm. And actually, I think there's a much more, God is interested in a much broader conversation than that,
Yeah.
And so I think us having the opportunity to have those conversations together. And as you say, gathering unity is such a special and important thing to do, you know?
Yeah. I always remember Jeff Lucas joking from the front and saying, if you ever find the perfect church, when nothing is wrong and everyone's in unity together, leave it before you spoil it.
Yeah.
Because you will be the problem. And it's like, yeah, absolutely, totally get that. It's churches aren't supposed to be places where everyone gets on perfectly, because let's face it, if our own families can't get on perfectly together, how are we supposed to do that? We are all fallen and we are all created differently. And what church is a beautiful place for the broken to gather before the cross and before God and go, you know what? Although we are broken, you are still God.
Yeah.
And you love us.
Yeah, absolutely. As my friend Alan says, there's no music without tension.
That's good. That's good. Actually, I'm going to have to jot that down and let my own band know that later on as well. Honestly, it's great fun. Well, thank you so much. There's been there's so much meat at the moment in what you've said so far that I need to chew it over now. And I think this is the perfect place to sort of rest and stop and let people breathe. So thank you, John, for speaking with us today, and thank you for joining us if you are from the Pursue Network. The Pursue Network is a charity based in Devon and Cornwall, but if you're from wider afield, you are more than welcome to watch, enjoy and engage, especially with the amazing content we've had today, looking at the ECG of worship and the various other aspects. So yeah, thank you again, John, and hopefully see you again soon.
Thank you, Steve. Been a real pleasure.
Brilliant.